From Peterson to Sibley, Nat Geo, and Kaufman, birders love debating what the best field guide is. Sure, it is ultimately a matter of personal preference, but there are some objective factors that make a field guide better or more useful than any others. If you're new here, I'm Doug Hitchcox. My goal is to get the most people to see the most birds, and in this video, I'm going to cover what the best field guide to the birds of the United States and Canada is currently. We'll look at other guides from around the world to see where we come up short, and I'll give a little preview of a book that isn't out yet but has the potential to take the #1 spot. After a pair of binoculars, a field guide is arguably the next most important tool for birding. There are dozens of options, and picking the correct one, as mentioned, is a personal preference, but largely comes down to who the user is. So let's start there. Before answering what the best guide is, we should start with answering who is it for. Someone brand new to birding might be more intrigued by a small 100 species guide to the birds of their state. Some of these are especially appealing because they are organized by color, but that is more subjective than you might think. One person might see the white-breasted nuthatch as mostly gray, while someone else could see that as a cooler blue. These basic guides might be a good option for your first month of birding, but if you are serious about the hobby, you are pretty quickly going to want to find something with a bit more depth. Taking that next step up, the ABA has guides to many states and territories covering 250 or more species and organized by taxonomy. Rather than those subjective colors, learning birds by their morphology and who their taxonomically closer relatives are is a much better approach and going to make learning new species much easier in the long run. As we expand breadth and depth further, we now get into better known top-tier field guides, typically covering an entire country or region. Again, for this video we're focusing on birds found in the United States and Canada, but as you'll see in a minute, the Holy Grail is actually a European guide. It is worth mentioning that many birders will age out or skill out of needing a field guide. In psychology, there's a learning model called conscious competence, with 4 tiers that I think match up with birding skill and tool use quite nicely. The lowest stage is unconscious incompetence, where an individual doesn't know how to do something and may not see the value in it. These are the birders that just post photos on Facebook groups and ask, "What's this bird?" or rely solely on Merlin to identify birds for them. Next is conscious incompetence, where they know what they don't know, in this case the identity of a bird, but they are aware of their deficit. So they're probably going to be the people I mentioned earlier that want a short list of color-sorted birds in their area. Conscious competence comes with birders who are using the right field guide and working hard to identify a bird. They know how to do something, and there is heavy conscious involvement in executing the skill. These are the Sibley and Nat Geo users. And finally, the level of unconscious competence are the birders that don't need a field guide at all. They are so skilled or really have enough experience that they don't need to reference a field guide and to know what birds they're looking at. Of course, learning birds is a never-ending pursuit, and there is always more to learn. So we have this big spectrum of field guides out there, but some are better than others. I need to reiterate that the best field guide is ultimately going to be a matter of personal preference, but there are some objective things that we can measure to decide what makes a field guide good. One of the first debates to get out of the way has to do with the field guide's plates and how a bird is depicted. I'd argue that a field guide is more of a picture book for birders, as the text, while still important, is often limited and only helps add to the art. We've come a long way from the original Peterson field guide from 1934 with only a few pages of color plates and not even all the species in the book being depicted with an illustration. I'd love to know the thought process here, where even super common species like chickadees aren't illustrated, but I guess even a beginner birder would be more likely to recognize one. Meanwhile, northern mockingbird and both shrikes are left out, though they have nearly identical descriptions. I only point this out to show how far we've come. We now expect every book to have every species visualized, some even including extinct species. We even expect most subspecies, or specifically field identifiable forms, to be in our guides. I'm not going to get too technical with the use of these terms here, but it's worth mentioning that when we refer to a bird like an Oregon dark-eyed junco, it's actually a group that comprises 7 different subspecies. This is a big selling point for top guides like Sibley and Nat Geo, which show almost every plumage you are likely to encounter in the field. Going beyond showing males and females and sexually dimorphic species, they include juveniles and birds in flight, plus the subspecies or groups of subspecies that look distinct. But it is how those birds are depicted that is fun to debate, especially between photos and illustrations. I know a lot of people that prefer photos because they prefer a real depiction of the bird, but my argument would be that choosing one single individual to represent an entire species is severely limiting. An artist can paint, or use whatever medium of their choice, to render an image that is an average of all the individuals together. They can also put the bird in the best position for seeing relevant field marks, or better yet, comparing field marks across multiple species. One example that I think perfectly shows this advantage is with night herons. If we look at Sibley's wonderfully laid out side by side juvenile night herons, you can see how they are structurally different, differences in bill color, but one of the best or most reliable field marks, because it is less subjective than those others that I mentioned, is the pale markings on the edge of the secondaries, present on yellow crown, absent on black crown. Now, if we go to the Kaufman guide, which uses photos that have been digitally altered to better show field marks, this is the best we get. Quick correction from future Doug. That plate is actually from the Kaufman New England guide, which is definitely a little more limited. In the North American guide, he does have much better plates showing those two. So anyways, good move, Kaufman. Sorry for getting that one wrong. Speaking of Sibley's artwork, that is one of the best reasons his guide is the best option out there. What I love about the plates is that they really lack detail, but as they are shrunk down to the roughly 1-inch image in the book, you see the most important field marks. The National Geographic guides have some incredible artwork too, but their various illustrators often paint very detailed plates, literally showing every feather, which is beautiful, but I think it can actually be more confusing in a field guide by accentuating marks that you might not actually see in the field. I have a lot of thoughts on Nat Geo's mix of artists and especially errors in printing that you can see in my review from earlier this year. Looking away from North America, I have to give full credit to what is arguably the best field guide, though I don't know who would disagree, the Collins Bird Guide. Now in its 3rd edition, this is regarded as the gold standard for birding guides. It has the more traditional layout of text and maps on the left page, plates on the right, but those plates are absolutely stunning. One of my favorite finds in my book collection was this large format Collins guide I found in a map store in Boston, on sale as they were going out of business. Anyways, the birds are remarkable, and especially these vignettes that show the birds in their habitat, exactly how you would expect to find them. The last thing I'll mention about illustrations is some of the incredible work showing up in monographs. Instead of field guides to a region, these are family or order specific books that give much more detail because they focus on maybe a couple dozen species instead of hundreds. That lighter load for the illustrator usually means that we get more detail and more visuals in general than would be crammed into a field guide. I want to give a shout out to Richard Allen's plates in the Birds of Paradise and Bowerbirds monographs. Sure, they are some of the most visually stunning birds, but Allen's artwork is incredible. And John Gale's work, which you might recognize from some recent African field guides, but his seabirds in the Flood and Fisher series are by far my favorite depictions of some of those species for their true-to-life looks and coverage of angles and plumages. So with my bias towards illustrations over photographs out of the way, another factor worth discussing is how guides differentiate themselves, usually with some novel features or selling points. Richard Crosley took using photos to a whole new level with his guides where he digitally laid out each species in the habitat, starting with the most common plumages, large and up front, then showing infrequently encountered plumages and flight shots further back on the plate. This was a neat idea, but it reminds me of the saying that you can't make chicken salad out of chicken shit. I'll always remember someone submitting a record of Pacific loon in Maine on eBird, and when I asked them for how they identified it, they said that it looked exactly like the one in the upper corner of their Crosley. This is obviously a user error more than the guide's fault, but I don't like this approach in general. Another neat feature that almost seemed ahead of its time, but that time may never come, is the spectrograms in Chan Robbins' Golden Guide. Spectrograms are a visual representation of a bird's song, showing frequency over time, and it is pretty awesome that a guide from 1966 included these. Unfortunately, most people have no idea how to read them, and most of the birds' songs are diverse enough that a single spectrogram isn't that helpful, let alone being this tiny in the book. We are now used to authors attempting to write out bird songs like Zeer, Puck, Tree, Cheeto, Cheeto, Creet, 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 Churr for lark sparrow. But I do like to point out this quote from Peterson's 1934 guide where he explicitly calls out how useless these descriptions are. A sizzle trill or a bubbling warble conveys a wretched idea of the real effect produced by the voice of any particular bird. They are descriptions, but are of little help, except in remembering a note we have already identified. Now, we do have Nathan Pipelow's bird songs of eastern and western US if spectrograms are your thing. Another unique feature in a guide is Nat Geo's use of the cutout tabs for quickly finding a group of birds. These give you easy access to some of the harder to identify families of birds. My only criticism is that once you use your guide, whatever it is, for a month or two, you're going to get used to the layout and the arrangement that you'll know just by feel where certain birds are. Those raptors are going to be towards the middle and warblers in the back quarter, and so on. Other guides have attempted similar quick finders, but one I wanted to point out was again in the Golden Guide, where they saved money on cutting the tabs out, but instead let you do the work yourself. You can bend the book on its edge and use a pen to mark at different lengths where each family is. I honestly don't know if I love or hate this. I hate trying to mark it myself, but I love it for anyone else who has the patience. While praising the Golden Guide, I also want to give them credit for the great use of space and showing off things that are actually helpful. On most pages, they include these headers showing silhouettes of structurally similar families, which are great suggestions if the birds you are trying to ID is not on that page. I posted a poll on my channel about a week ago asking what everyone's favorite guide was, and unsurprisingly, Sibley got the majority of the votes, coming in at 71%. But I really appreciated some of the comments, especially those noting how some guides like Peterson, while still top tier, are better for the beginners. Now would be a good time to make sure you subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on future posts. And speaking of the Sibley Guide as being the best, perhaps the best part is that it also is available as an app. This first coming out in 2011, and 10 years later after the second edition of the Field Guide came out, so did a new version of the app. Even better is that the app gets annual updates with more illustrations added and taxonomic updates are made. This was one of my slightly unfair complaints with the new Nat Geo guide, that buying a book advertised with, quote, the latest taxonomy was almost 2 years out of date because of the delay between when it was finished writing and actually getting printed. A digital version solves this problem, and the Sibley app was updated a couple weeks after I posted that Nat Geo review, making it the guide with the most up-to-date taxonomy. I do find Sibley's newer artwork a bit funny juxtaposed against the originals. As I mentioned earlier, those 20-plus-year-old plates have wonderfully little detail that I find less distracting, where the newer stuff is very detailed, on the same level as some of the newer Nat Geo artwork. This newer artwork mostly shows up with the new species added, like social flycatcher, but also with new plumages for us to be on the lookout for too. I love the inclusion of the austral breeding barn swallows, which we see in our summer, the austral winter, as they are molting. A great thing for North American birders to be on the lookout for. One of my biggest complaints with the Sibley Guide app is the layout and overall user experience. These pages don't seem to have changed much from the standards of early smartphone operating systems, and having birds presented in a list with tiny thumbnails makes comparisons difficult. You can select a species, and then there is a compare button that shows similar looking species, and you can split the screen to compare different plumages side by side, but it's pretty clunky. Remember our gold standard field guide? Well, the Collins Guide has an app too, and unsurprisingly it is the best guide to use on a phone. It wonderfully fixes the layout issues with Sibley by giving you these 3 tiers of viewing species by order, family, and species. This gives that same feel of flipping through a field guide, and the developer even put these little haptics in as you zoom in or out, which is just lovely. When the new editions of the Collins Guide have come out, they've offered an in-app purchase to update, but it appears that they are all built into version 3 now. I never paid for the update, but have all the new plates and text. The other app I have to mention, of course, is Merlin. I've left it out until this point because I don't really consider it a field guide, at least currently. Just another tool for identification. It currently is really bad for comparing species and only has photos to go with each bird, which you know how I feel about from our earlier conversation. But Merlin is free and now covers over 10,000 species of birds across the world. The Sound ID feature, which currently works for about 1,300 species, is probably one of the greatest introductions to birds for the average person, and it is certainly going to be a launching point for people that are getting more interested. Merlin is superior in a few places. Obviously, the size and scope makes it wonderful, especially in specific regions. I co-led a trip to Peru last year, and while I use this Peruvian guide for studying, this thing is way too massive to want to carry around in the field, and that's where Merlin was the superior option. I will say the killer app I wish Cornell would come out with next would be some version of Birds of the World. They've got artwork for all the species, solving Merlin's photo only problem, and extensive species accounts. Birds of the World is already a subscription service, and I bet having it available as an easy to use app would get more people to start paying monthly. So, for birders in the US and Canada, I think the Sibley Guide and Merlin app are the best guides that you should be using right now. But there is something really exciting coming soon, hopefully. For years now, we've heard rumors of the Princeton Guide to North American Birds that would feature illustrations from Ian Lewington, arguably one of the best bird illustrators in the world. Lewington is British, but American birders will probably be most familiar with his work from The Rare Birds of North America, written by Steve Howell and Will Russell, which Lewington illustrated and hit the shelves in 2014. Like the monographs I mentioned earlier, this is just page after page of stunning artwork. Rumors of this Princeton Guide and even samples have been going around for years at this point. Here's an article from All About Birds in 2017 showing Lewington's Williamson sapsucker plate, with the caption saying the guide is forthcoming. To be fair, they don't say when, but I thought with teasers like this it would only be a year or two away. Well, 8 years later, we have an exciting update from an odd source. In February, Lewington was a presenter at the Extremadura Bird Fair in Spain, and he gave a brief update on the guide. There is a recording up on YouTube, frustratingly dubbed, but thanks to Google Translate, we get a few tidbits. Along with sharing some new plates, which are absolutely stunning, I mean, these hit all the important notes we talked about earlier, Lewington says that they are aiming for the end of 2026 or beginning of 2027 for a release for the guide. He also mentions that Lorenzo Starnini helped with 40 to 50 plates out of the 280 or so total. I have to admit that I hadn't heard of Starnini before, but from what I've seen from him, this duo will not disappoint. In that same presentation I mentioned, Lewington showed off one of Starnini's plates, saying that he saved the best for last. I'm incredibly excited for this guide, but trying to keep my expectations on the release date low, because for all I know, it could be many more years before we finally see it in print. And man, do I hope that they come out with a good app as well. Princeton publishes the US version of the Collins Guide, so hopefully someone there has connections to nature guides and can get us a similar app for the Princeton Guide. Alright, let me know in the comments what you think. Do you prefer something over Sibley, or is the Sibley-Merlin combo the best? Are you excited for this Princeton Guide, or do you think it's doomed to be delayed even further? And while you're commenting, make sure you click subscribe. That is the best way that you can help me with my goal of getting the most people to see the most birds. And as always, thank you for watching.